Hello, and welcome to Magic is Real, a podcast focused on the fascinating world of near-death experiences, spirit communication, and all things metaphysical and spiritual. The mission of this project is to share messages of hope and inspiration with others, and to spread the word that death is only an illusion. Thank you for being here with an open heart and mind. I wish you peace, light, and love always. Hello, Magic is Real listeners. Thank you so much for being here. Today, I have with me the lovely Holly Duckworth, PhD. I am so glad she reached out to me. Welcome, Holly. I will tell you all about her in just a moment.
Thanks, Shannon.
But I just wanted to introduce her and say hi. So Holly is she's a therapist, but I'm going to have her explain this. It's QHHT, which is Quantum Healing Hypnotherapy. What's the last initial?
Hypnosis technique.
See, that's why I leave this to you. And she's also a psychotherapist.
And it's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. She is a psychotherapist. She's a keynote speaker and author. And I'm going to tell you right now the name of her book, Finding Purpose, Surprising Wisdom from the Higher Self, which I also want to talk about. And she is here today to talk about spirituality and what this form of healing is. And we're going to get to know her right now. So thank you so much for being here, Holly. It's so wonderful to have you.
Thank you, Shannon, for having me. I'm so excited because I'm such a huge fan of Magic is Real. So this is a super honor for me to be with you.
Me too. Without you, it wouldn't be possible. So first, Holly, I want to talk about you, the person, the human. I would love to know, I know that you were a mechanical engineer, but I also always like to know where somebody comes from in their spiritual journey. When you grew up, what was your background like in terms of your spiritual perspectives and beliefs?
Sure. So, my parents were pretty, they weren't avid churchgoers, but of course we were on Easter and Christmas marched into the local Methodist church for our dose of Christianity. And I think Vacation Bible School was a great way to get rid of me and my brothers in the summer for my mom. But it wasn't really a particularly spiritually connected household. I would look around. I remember even as a young child, Shannon, I remember looking around in church, understanding what was being taught and talked about, and looking around going, oh, these people really need to be here.
Yeah.
Right? They need these lessons.
Yeah.
But I wasn't. And then, of course, as a young adult, none of that was a part of my purview. But I always felt very resolute, very confident in my spiritual ideals. One of the examples that I give is I knew from an early age that God was not some dude in sandals and a robe sitting on a cloud. It's like, no, it's bigger. It is bigger than that, right? And so I thought sorted out these spiritual thoughts in my mind, but I wasn't necessarily connected to any sort of spiritual practice or anything like that until I found Dolores Cannon in QHHT.
Can we talk about Dolores Cannon? I love her. So yes, tell me what you discovered.
So I had already gotten my PhD in psychology, and I wasn't really sure why. It was just compelling. I was actually in a situation where I was doing operations management, really left brain engineering, process engineering type stuff for automotive and aerospace manufacturers. So I was in factories all day, every day, doing really important and dynamic things, but analytic things. And of course, that meant also studying people. So I'm sure that had a little bit of that, how people affect the manufacturing process. So I'm sure that had a little bit to do with my interest in psychology. But I went all the way for a PhD, and I was always like, well, this is fascinating to me. I was lucky. I was in a situation where my employer was paying for my degree, so it was fabulous at the time. But I never really knew what I was going to do with it. So fast forward a couple of years after I get my PhD, I'm doing things like organizational development, leadership development, some consulting and some coaching, using my psychology background. And then my then 20-year-old son gets arrested for a DUI. And I'm emotionally distraught. I mean, it's a seriously emotionally challenging part of my life. I'm pacing the floors. I can't sleep. I'm tearing my hair out. I'm an emotional wreck. And he was in a situation where he was going to be incarcerated for 21 days. I couldn't visit him. I could only have like just a few random phone calls with him. And in one of those phone calls, he says, "Hey, Mom, I found this book in jail. I think you'd really enjoy it." And it was Dolores Cannon, Convoluted Universe, Book 4. Never heard of her, never would have heard of her in my world. But just to have something to talk to my son about, after we hang up, Amazon, click, click.
Book
Yeah,
club, prison
yeah,
book club.
yeah, I'll get the
Yeah.
book. I'll get the, well, I learned later that she had a whole prison outreach with her books.
That's
Yeah, it was
amazing.
a thing. Yeah. They were trying to get her books the publishing company was trying to get her books into as many prisons and jails as possible. So anyway, I opened Convoluted 4 and I'm like, oh my gosh, everything I've ever believed spiritually in my entire life. And here it is in print. Okay. Things like God, source energy is the fabric of the universe, concepts like that. And I'm reading and I'm reading and I'm just dumbfounded how aligned my internal beliefs were to what was on these pages. So by the time my son gets out, I had read 5 of her books. I went to Custodians, Keepers of the Garden, more Convoluteds, and he got out in December. And in January, she was going to be having a weekend seminar. She would do these like 3-day retreat things where she would have a ballroom of 200 people and they'd all be going into hypnosis simultaneously for different kinds of experiences. And so my son gets out and she was going to be appearing in a different city. And I told my son, I'm like, let's go see her. Let's be in the room with her. Oh my gosh. And so we went. It was healing for him as well after his traumatic experience. And of course, eye-opening for me. That was in January. By the next month, I was in training to be a QHHT practitioner. And I'm like, that's it. I'm done. I know what the rest of my life looks like. This is amazing. So powerful, so impactful. And then, of course, as a part of this process, we're working with a higher self, the spiritual side of you, and we'll get into that.
Yeah.
But I have a front row seat to that all day, every day. So that was a major part then of my spiritual awakening is that connection with Dolores and the process of QHHT.
Thank you for that. I want to know all about it. I want to know what the process is, how it works,
Mhm.
and then we'll get into more depth, but let's just
Okay.
start there.
Okay, so Dolores Cannon, for those who don't know her, she only has, actually, as of now, 20 books written. One that she passed in 2014, but one that she had in the file cabinet when she passed has just recently been published. So we're up to 20 Dolores Cannon books now. She was prolific, and her entire career focus was that of past life regressive hypnosis. And she wrote 2 books on Jesus and the Essenes. She had a client who regressed as the rabbi that gave Jesus and John their bar mitzvah. So she wrote her books around that. She wrote books around Nostradamus, connecting directly with Nostradamus through time to reinterpret his quatrains. She wrote historically oriented books about people who had experienced, a person who had experienced Hiroshima and the dropping of the atomic bomb firsthand. So a lot of her early books were around the historical references that she could then glean through the regressive hypnosis. And it was really only later, much later into her hypnosis work, into the 1990s, when she realized that physical healing could be completed through this connection to higher self, an entity she called subconscious, we now call superconscious, I call higher self. It's the eternal part of you. So you can think about it as your soul, however you want to think about, whatever name you want to apply to it. It's the eternal part of you, the part of you that was there before your human body and will be there after your human body. And so we connect with this part of ourselves through hypnosis. And then she found that you can create all kinds of physical, emotional healing, get all kinds of unraveling of life lessons and relationships and life decisions, past, present, future. You can do all of this in this hypnosis state in conversation with a higher self. And so then she created quantum healing hypnosis technique in the early 2000s. I think her very first situation of training other people to do this was around 2002, I think, or 2006, something like that, early 2000s. And then she spent the rest of her life either facilitating QHHT herself or teaching others how to do this. And so a QHHT session is very, very different than most either clinical hypnosis sessions or past life regression sessions. So you only ever have one session. That one session is 5 to 7 hours. So I only spend the day with one client. And in that session, the client comes to the session with all the questions they would want to ask the higher self. So again, these are questions definitely about physical manifestations, emotional healing, life decisions, relationships, past, present, future, any and all questions. And then we spend a couple of hours in the session making sure that I understand not only the questions, but the context around the questions, because I'm going to be having an organic conversation with a higher self. So I kind of need to be prepared to manage that conversation, to get out of it what the client wants out of it. So I've got to really understand what they want out of it. So we spend a couple of hours doing that. Then we go into the hypnosis, and the hypnosis alone is 2 to 3 hours.
Mhm.
So because of that luxury of time, we get to experience really deep states of trance. And then that's where we're having another life experience, a past life experience. I like to say other life because people are taken to simultaneous lives, future lives. It's not always past lives. And then I have the conversation with the higher self and get all their questions answered, healing done. And then I bring them out, debrief a little, and then they leave the session with a recording of the hypnosis. And then they continue the therapeutic process on their own by listening to that recording over and over and over and over again to unpack the wisdom that has been given to them. So
Wow,
that's a
that's
QHHT session.
I want to have one. Now I'm like, do I want to get certified in this? This is so
Yeah,
fascinating. I love it.
yeah.
So you've done so many of these, and I would love to hear if you're whatever you're able to share. I know there's confidentiality, but even examples of how this has helped people, or really anything that stands out in your mind as
Mhm.
something really memorable. I'd love to
Yeah,
hear any stories you have to share.
yeah. One of my favorite for physical healing, I have a lot of people that come with cancer, autoimmune diseases, so diabetes, fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, all kinds of joint issues. And one of my favorite physical healing stories is a gentleman. There's so many hilarious parts to this story. So he was an elderly gentleman in his 70s, and he was sent to me from his son that is an MD, a medical doctor.
Interesting.
And the father had a recurrence, was experiencing a recurrence of bladder cancer. So he had bladder cancer once before, went through chemo and radiation and all that terrible stuff. And then the cancer came back. And so his son, the doctor, sends
Yeah.
him to me.
I want to know about that and how the doctor found you too.
Right, right. And so the family was originally from Pakistan. The father had been an adult in Pakistan. They had immigrated later in the father's life. And so he was also a devout Muslim, which I also think is way cool because I've
Yeah.
seen clients of all kinds of religious backgrounds. Doesn't matter what
Yeah.
your religious background is. And so he was sent to me from his son. And he was one of these people who in trance is his conscious mind was completely unaware. And that can happen. Some people it's just natural for them to be aware in trance, and for other people their conscious mind is completely unaware in trance. I don't know how to predict who is where, but there seems to be a normal for each person individually. And this gentleman was one of those that was completely unaware. So we go through the whole session. Of course, the higher self healed the bladder cancer. One of the things that we make sure that we understand in a QHHT session is why. Why was this situation even created in the first place? So we had unraveled all of that and thoroughly understood the circumstances. And then, of course, the higher self enacted the healing. It's never me healing; it's the higher self healing that person. And then we've got all of his other questions answered. Now he's out. It's like anesthesia, right, for him this whole time. And then he gets up, I bring him out, he gets up, he's coming to, and we're having a little chat, and he's still laying on the bed in my office. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to start working on getting you your recording. If you need to go to the restroom, now's a great time to do that. And he goes, oh, yeah, yeah. So he leaves the room, goes to the restroom, and I'm, at my computer. I've got my back to the door. I'm getting his recording ready, just doing my computer stuff. And he bursts back in, like frightened me. He like slams the door open, comes back into the office, and he goes, "What happened? What happened?" And because with the bladder cancer, before the session, he was unable to urinate freely. And then, of course, immediately after the session, they had healed the cancer instantaneously. And of course, he
Whoa.
had no problem going to the bathroom, but it shocked him because he didn't know. I hadn't had a chance to tell him that he was healed. And so he burst back in the office. What happened? What happened? I'm like, well, they healed you.
Yeah.
And so I had a steady after that. I have a steady stream of clients from this big city where this doctor resides of his
He was sending people
patients.
to you. Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
That's amazing.
Isn't
Especially
it?
because I've gone to so many energy healers and nothing, I mean, I know that so much of it too is your own ability to your own mind frame and your thinking and that
Hmm.
sort of thing as well.
Hmm.
But I've never found it helpful, but I believe in it and I'm Reiki
Hmm.
certified.
Hmm.
And so but I love this approach because it feels so much more specific.
Yeah,
I've had people say, oh, the reason that you have vocal problems is because your throat was slashed in another
right.
lifetime. And I'm like, but we don't
Right.
know that for like,
Exactly.
I don't know that that's true. You could easily guess that. Not to say that the person isn't legit, but it's just
Right.
even as an intuitive myself, I know I'm not always right. I'm not, not
Exactly.
everything that comes to me is the right thing. So, um,
Exactly.
and we actually talked a bit before we hopped on here about it's so amazing that this doctor sent somebody of the science world sent somebody to you
Right.
and many somebodies to you
Uh-huh.
because we talked a bit about how there is often a fear or a resistance to
Mhm.
spirituality.
Right.
Why do you think that is? And also, let's just talk about it, like
Yeah.
whatever you want to say about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my urge was to tell the doctor, I'm like, you could be doing this hypnosis and doing a lot more good in the
Yeah,
world and signing people up for chemo. But anyway, that's his path.
yeah,
And I do think that perhaps in that situation, the father who was devoutly Muslim, and did have a spiritual awareness and a spiritual life, through his religion, that probably did help. And then also probably the analytic resistance and training of the sun probably prevented him from seeing what he could be doing instead of what he was doing. And so, yeah, I think that there's this, and it's also I think I'm in a really interesting perspective on this, having been an engineer. All I have three younger brothers. They're all engineers. My dad was an engineer. My entire family is as left brain as it gets. And um and I think that this tension between science and spirituality need not be there. One of my favorite, I mean, I'm a and I'm sorry, we've got a train passing back here,
It's
so I'm
nice.
sorry
It makes, it
if
adds
that
to the,
bothers
I
you.
don't know. Doesn't at all. I love it.
Okay, okay.
It's organic.
Yeah. So I'm a quantum physics junkie. I love reading about quantum
Yeah,
physics, YouTube videos about
me
quantum
too.
physics, and as the scientists look down into smaller and smaller particles, they keep going smaller and smaller. We've got all these atom smashers all over the world, the Large Hadron Collider and all of that, and they keep trying to break these smaller and smaller particles apart, looking for the thing, looking for the particle, and there never is any. Every time they go smaller and smaller, all they ever find is energy, right?
Right.
And energy spinning in different directions with different probabilities. And so it's like, guys, science is proving spirituality.
I
To
know.
me, to me, spirituality, the easy definition of spirituality is just it's a study of the unseen.
Yes, I've always said it's not, there's nothing para or supernatural about it. I mean, it's actually, if the Native Americans knew this, that it's actually part of it. The fact that I sometimes say, why am I even so fascinated by my own ability to contact spirit and communicate with them? And is when it's really, it's just as natural as anything
It's
else, but
ordinary. Yes.
we think it's so extraordinary,
Yeah.
and it seems magic. It
Yeah.
seems like magic, but it's actually, that's our sixth sense, which is the
Exactly. The
intangible
unseen.
sense. Yeah.
Right. Right. It's just an appreciation and understanding and interest and a curiosity in the unseen. It's that simple. And that's what quantum physicists are doing. So it's like, you kind of see this big circle, like right now we're probably right about here, where we had this, it used to be eons ago that spirituality and science were the same thing, and then science went one way, spirituality went another, and now I think we're on the cusp of it coming back together because of what the quantum physicists are doing.
Yeah.
They're going to prove spirituality for us all.
Exactly. Actually, when my sister and her husband were visiting this summer with the kids, my dad, I've now since found out, my mom said, your dad's surprised you think he's an atheist. He's actually a deist. I said,
Mm,
oh, I just didn't ever talk to him about this because I figured one time I took a photo with him and there was this huge purple orb in the picture. And he's like,
mm,
what is that? I'm like, it's spirit. And he went, ah,
mm.
people who believe in that are nuts or something. So I never talked to him about it. But we had this conversation where my brother-in-law has a PhD in critical thinking.
Oh,
He's very much
okay.
atheistic, and grew up that way. And
Uh-huh.
that's what his job is. And then we've got my dad, who's like this businessman, and then my mother, who's spiritual, and me, who's spiritual. And we were
Mm,
all able to talk about it and understand it. Like I was
uh-huh.
saying, my point of view from a medium's perspective and their points of view, and it was all the same thing. I was saying it
Mhm,
was actually after watching Through the
mhm,
Wormhole with,
mhm.
I think it was the Morgan Freeman
Oh,
one,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
the universe
yeah.
one, that I
Uh-huh,
started to think, wait, this is spirituality. This is what
uh-huh.
spirituality actually is. I
Exactly.
mean, the universe is continually expanding.
Uh-huh,
Okay, well, the
uh-huh.
Big Bang, but where did the Big Bang come from? What was there
Right,
before that?
right,
What was there before
right,
that? And then you just
right.
go, where
Everything
did
is
it
just
come from?
vibration.
Yeah.
We've known that spiritually forever, that everything, that your vibrational frequency is the most important part of you. It's the most important thing to pay attention to. Now the quantum physicists are going, oh yeah, Whether the photon goes through the slot or becomes a particle or a wave through the slot depends on the
Perceiver.
nature or the
Yeah.
intention of the observer.
Can you, I'm so not science, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but the thing is, when I read these concepts, I understand them, but I am not a scientific person, which is why
Hmm.
physics starts to confuse me after a few
Hmm.
sentences.
Hmm.
So I love that because I know about that study. I find
Hmm.
it so fascinating. I just don't think I can articulate it well. Do you feel that you can
Yeah.
explain it? Because I'd love to
Yeah,
share it.
yeah. So I'll try to simplify it.
Yeah,
Of course,
layman's terms. Yeah,
there's entire physics textbooks written on just this one experiment, but
right.
it goes back to, I think it's the 1970s, late 60s, early 1970s. This is an old quantum physics experiment. And so basically what they do, they have a screen on one end of the room and they have a photon shooter on one end of the room. And a photon is just a particle of light. But light, people have known, you can, for hundreds of years, that's the point of the game with the prism, is that light can either be a particle or a wave. And it depends, we used to think it depends on, well, is it going through a piece of glass or is it hitting the side of a brick building? That determines, what it's going to be, a particle or a wave. And then you got the little prism thing and you can see all the different wavelengths of light, so then that's one way of seeing the waves of a photon. Or you have a photovoltaic cell, a solar cell on your house, and that's heating up the glass and the electrons that are inside of that glass, and so that's an example of light as a particle, heat that providing the heat. So we can see all sorts of ordinary ways in which we can see light as a particle or a wave. So in the double slit experiment, if you have a photon shooter, they put a little barrier in between the screen and the photon shooter that will allegedly force the photon to do different things. Now, if you can kind of imagine a gun with a bullet, that might be an easy way to wrap our heads around it. If it goes through the slit as a particle, it's just all the bullets are just going to pile up in the one space, right? And you're just going to have on the screen, you're just going to have this giant clump of particles after you've shot a bunch of particles at it. Okay. If it's acting like a particle. If it's acting like a wave, then you're going to have this striped pattern, because different points of the wave are going to fall through the slit at different rates. And then on the screen, you're going to have these stripes across the screen where the waves have gone through the slit at different amplitudes as it goes through the slit. And so what they find is, and so then they set up the whole experiment, and they can set the slit up, or actually it's a filter before the slit, to try to force the photon to behave in one way or the other. Okay. And whenever they set up this experiment, the photons don't behave in the way they're supposed to behave, given the setup of the experiment. They behave in the way the observer, the experimenter, intends them to behave.
Yeah, expects and intends for them to behave,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I
And so
love.
the experimenter, the observer, is the one that then is deciding in reality
Yeah,
if the photon is acting like a particle or a wave.
AKA the matrix, AKA the simulation we live in,
Exactly.
which
Exactly.
is what manifestation, I mean, it's based on a lot, but that's one of
Mhm.
the sort of proof of the fact that we can
Mhm.
create our own realities. What do
Yeah.
you know about that? Because from what I understand, the concept, and I'd love to know what your, I don't want to say beliefs, but what you understand our power to be. Um, as you understand it, as I understand it, there are all these different sort of parallel dimensions, I want to say, and you can
Hmm.
correct me if this
Hmm.
doesn't make sense. Uh, and so it's sort of like, it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes, which is by Sylvia Plath. The Bell Jar, where she talks about, it's different, but reminds me of this. She talks about how her life was a tree, branches, each branch represented a possibility in her life. I
Mm-hmm.
could be a mother
Hmm.
and just a mom. I could be a writer. I could be an actor, whatever the things were. And she's like, the problem is I can't decide on either one of them. So all of them are just withering and dying. And that's
Mm.
different. But I always related so much with that because I'm someone who has like a million different talents, but when I was younger, I just didn't know what to do with them.
Uh-huh.
And but it's basically like, and she said the whole tree is dying because I can't just go in one
Yeah,
direction. I feel so overwhelmed by all the possibilities. But that
right.
there are different possibilities in other realities.
Yeah,
We can actually live them out sort of simultaneously all at once,
yeah,
but we can
yeah,
also choose which one we want to be in. Take it
yeah,
from there, Holly Duckworth.
yeah. So I often say I'm a past life regressionist that doesn't believe in past lives. And
I
I'll
love this.
explain why. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll
I love this
explain
stuff.
why. So often, so like I said, part of Dolores Cannon's process is to very intentionally take someone firsthand into an other life. She started out using the term past life, but then we often have people experience simultaneous lives. I mean, from a timeline standpoint, they're a different person in a different place, or maybe even a different planet, but you can, kind of, think about from the facts of the story that it's in the same timeline, or even future, in the
Yeah.
future in this place, or also in other planets. And so if we can understand that we can experience simultaneous lives, future lives, past lives all at once, what we begin to understand is that time is an illusion. It's
Hmm.
a human perspective thing. It isn't a part of universal truth. And so all of our incarnations are actually happening in the now.
Hmm.
Our soul is experiencing all of its incarnations now. And we bump into this a lot in QHHT because sometimes physical issues can actually be related to other lives. Like someone like you had mentioned earlier that, someone had told you that vocal problems were because you were strangled in another life. That could be legit. And we actually heal that in QHHT through
Yeah.
the other life because we can connect to that other time and place because that other time and place is happening now, and we can energetically heal that other time and place, and then therefore the ramifications of that for the person that's in my office at that moment across time, because that incarnation isn't past. The other
Right.
reason why I discount this idea of my past life is because somewhere up there at a soul level, eventually, we're all one. My soul has separated from source to have a certain experience. Your soul has separated from source to have a certain experience. But if we go a level above our individual souls at some point in time up there, we're all one soul. And so we all have access to all lives. We are all experiencing the all. And so for me to think, oh, my past life, well, I think that's a little bit of a misnomer because ultimately my soul is experiencing all lives. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. It's very
Okay.
confusing.
It is convoluted, yes.
And I always had the question before when I understood reincarnation to be past lives and you come back again, your soul just needs to keep learning, right? So I thought, well, okay, but if I reincarnate as somebody else, then how come a medium can contact my grandmother? And how is she
Exactly.
still my grandmother? But one of my best teachers, Monica 10K, Monica the Medium, she had a show. Everyone check it out. It's on YouTube now, I think. She describes it in her book as we have this higher self, and she compares it to a clementine fruit. And she said we have these little
Mm-hmm.
it's our higher soul self, but it can be divided into different pieces. Each piece is part of the same fruit.
Yes.
So they can all branch off
Yes.
and they can all live these lives in other dimensions,
Yes. Yes.
um, which may, in our timeline in this human experience, might have been in the year 1742, but it's
Exactly.
actually on the other side. There is no time. If you've watched the show for long
Exactly.
enough, you'll hear that from many near-death experiencers who realize that this is just time is linear here, but not on the other side.
Mhm.
So I'd love to hear you elaborate about that as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that, yeah. And so we can even heal across time. We can have experiences across time. Dolores wrote 3 volumes of books on Nostradamus. And what she found out she could do through hypnosis is she could have a direct conversation with Nostradamus, not the past Nostradamus, but the current Nostradamus. And so to write these 3 books, she would get a third person, if you want to think about that, a
Yeah.
client to go into hypnosis, and then she would contact Nostradamus through the client, and then she would sit with a book, a modern day book of his quatrains as translated from French to English, and she would read them to him as she's talking to him through the client in hypnosis directly. And she had all these conversations with him, and he would be like, well, that's not what I meant blah, blah, blah. And she spent years reinterpreting his quatrains through direct connection to him.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I also want to know, I always had this idea that if I were hypnotized, I'm just too in my head, like, how would I really work on me? I think everyone wonders that.
Yes.
So the question is, does it work on everybody? Do you have to be in a certain state of allowing? And also, how does it work? How does
Mhm.
the act of hypnosis
Sure.
work?
Sure. Yeah. And of course, I'm also ideally suited for this as a psychologist because
Yes.
a lot of my colleagues aren't psychologists. So the brain part of the
Hmm.
hypnosis fascinates me because once you really understand it, you see how easy anybody can do this to channel anything from the spiritual side, of course, to connect to the higher self, but to also connect with loved ones on the other side. It's like ridiculously easy. So I've had 3 situations. I've been doing this for almost 10 years. In February, it'll be 10 years. And I've had 3 situations where people couldn't go into hypnosis. So the first situation is I had a gentleman whose wife made the appointment for him, unbeknownst to me. When he
Right.
came into my office, he had no intention of participating. So I cannot force anyone into hypnosis that doesn't want
Want to
to
go.
go.
Yeah.
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 So, number one, you have to be willing. The second situation I had is I had a client who had very severe ADHD, untreated, undiagnosed. And she was not able to focus in the way that we do require the imagination and visualization in order to get into a state of hypnosis. Subsequently, we got her some treatment, some meds, and she came back in and she was easily
Oh,
able to go into
yeah.
hypnosis with a little bit of treatment. And then the last situation I had, and my client, she called me and she told me her situation, and I was open. I'm like, well, let's try, let's see if it works. It didn't. She had advanced Parkinson's disease, and the tremors just didn't
Yeah. It's
allow
distracting.
her, yeah, didn't allow her to relax in the way that we needed to. So, as long as there's not some sort of severe, undiagnosed, untreated mental issue, as long as you're able to relax enough to frankly go to sleep,
Hmm.
and as long as you're willing, even you, Shannon, can go
Yay.
into
That's great.
hypnosis.
So every time I've done a past
Yeah.
life regression hypnosis, like in a group, I did one and
Mhm,
I just
mhm.
fell asleep. And,
Oh,
and then, they
uh-huh,
asked questions.
uh-huh,
I'm like, I mean, I think this is
uh-huh,
my name, but I
uh-huh.
didn't really feel, I was like, am I making this up?
Yeah.
Did come up with a name that I don't know where it came from. Like, and
Uh-huh.
I looked it up and I'm like, it really is a name
Uh-huh.
of that region. But I was like, I didn't really
Yeah.
feel like I was there. I just kind of
Yeah.
felt like I was whipping it out. of
It's this
nowhere.
really interesting brainwave state. That's what it is. It's a
Yeah.
brainwave state, and it's a brainwave state halfway in between awake and asleep.
And what
And
is there
so,
a certain, is it theta? Is it
yes,
delta?
it's theta.
It's
It's
theta.
theta.
Okay.
That's where we are in hypnosis. And so you can either I can either bring someone down to theta from a waking state or up to theta from a sleeping state. So it sounds like in that
Yeah.
group situation, you went too far
Yep.
down and went into the sleeping state, which is perfectly fine in my office because I have a technique to just bring you up to theta from
Yeah.
sleeping, right? Um, and so it's to get into that brainwave state, we use a lot of imagination and a lot of visualization. And also what's happening, so as I'm using the hypnosis technique, um, I'm watching things like rapid eye movement, breathing patterns, the way the client's responding to me. And then I'm constantly altering my technique ever so slightly to make sure that they're in that deep state of theta and that I am conversing with the higher self. You can't fake it. Dolores's
Right.
technique, you cannot fake.
I love that.
She has safeguards in there to that are tests that the practitioner knows about to make sure that we know that we are talking to the higher self. So it's really kind of a maneuvering of the hemispheres of the brain to get you into a certain brainwave state. And it's that brainwave state halfway in between awake and asleep. And a lot of people, when they feel it for the first time, they'll tell me, they'll say, well, that didn't feel weird. That felt really familiar. And it should, because you're in that brainwave state
Every
at
night.
least twice a day, every day. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's that I know most people have experienced this. You know, you're falling asleep and you know you're not yet asleep, or you
Hmm.
know you're
I know
waking up
exactly.
and you know you're not yet awake. That's it. That's hypnosis.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with mediumship. I have to bring my brain into a state of probably, I mean, it's probably theta.
It probably is.
It's,
Hmm.
I don't know, why sometimes I can get there and sometimes I'm not quite there, but I'm getting little pieces of things.
Hmm.
And I don't have a technique other than meditating
Hmm.
and intending. I just
Hmm.
ask spirit to put me there. I ask my
Hmm.
spirit guides to put me there.
Hmm.
And it's like tuning into a radio station that I'm just
Hmm.
trying to tune
Yeah.
into the right frequency. And probably 85% of the time I can get there. And then 15%, I'm like, I don't know why. I'm not, I'm
Yeah.
just not there. Either it's my energy or it's yours or it's ours
Yeah.
together or it's spirit. I don't know.
Psychologists of course, they're studying this brainwave state all the time. They have all of these scanning techniques now, which are really fascinating.
Yeah.
And what they've recently learned is that young children, up until about the age of 3 or 4, it depends, varies child to child, but they spend most of their time, of their entire life at that age in theta. And so my
Their
theory, I don't
imaginations.
yeah, yeah. And well, and in this altered state of consciousness, what we would as adults would call an altered state of consciousness, not a normal state of consciousness. And so my theory is that a lot of people that arrive at adulthood with psychic gifts weren't those gifts, that brainwave state wasn't quashed as a child. It was allowed to thrive through childhood. That's my theory anyway.
Yeah. And they did brain scans on some mediums. I've seen it on
Mhm,
Tyler Henry and the
mhm,
Long Island Medium. And they found, and others that I know, they found that I know in Teresa Caputo, the Long Island Medium's case, I remember them saying, your brain, it's interesting because your brain waves are different from other people's
mhm.
in that you are always in a meditative state. And if you
Yeah,
know Teresa,
yeah.
she is high strung, energetic,
Right,
anxious,
right.
nervous, but for whatever reason, her brain is able to be in theta just without trying. It's just the
Yeah,
way she was born. And that's why I
yeah.
believe that, well, I'm pretty positive about that's why mediumship, natural mediumship abilities are usually inherited.
Mhm,
Like Matt Frazier is one of the best mediums in the world. His mother is a medium as well.
mhm.
It's it's the way your brain is structured.
Yeah.
I've learned to do it. I was always a very highly sensitive person.
Mhm,
I'm HSP to the nth degree, but I've actually had to train myself to get out of that thinking brain, that
mhm,
analytical, that
mhm,
judging.
Mhm.
But once you do it and you practice it every day, which is what I did, I just
Yeah.
practiced meditating and I still do it every day
Eh,
to bring myself into the spirit realm zone.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Now think about this. Think about, so your 4-year-old, you've spent the last 4 years in the theta brainwave state. And as you just mentioned, as adults, we can operate quite effectively in the theta brainwave state. We don't, but we
yeah,
can. What if instead of the 5-year-old going, pay attention, quit daydreaming, do this, do that, figure this out, think about this, think about that. What if we didn't do that to the kids and then they never lost it? How
yeah.
cool would that be?
Because that's what we do. We have to learn life skills. And so we
Hmm.
go to school and then
Hmm.
we learn math and science and have to
Hmm.
think and have to perform.
Hmm.
And so we get out of when I was a kid, I lived in imagination my whole
Uh-huh.
I was selective mute. So I shut the whole
Uh-huh.
world out. So I was in a constant state of imagination and I was in my own world.
Yeah.
Even in Montessori school, because I didn't talk, I stayed to myself and I just daydreamed all day long.
Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh.
I'm sure, and I actually now I'm starting to remember spiritual experiences that it's hard because I was 2 and 3 and I'm not
Hmm.
sure what's memory and but I now I'm like, I think that I was seeing spirit. I
Uh-huh.
remember seeing things, but I just thought it was a
Uh-huh.
dream. Or at that time,
Uh-huh.
you don't know the difference between a dream and awake.
Uh-huh.
I thought my
Right.
dreams were real.
Right. Right.
My mom had to
Absolutely.
explain that
Yeah.
you're sleeping when you didn't really see a gorilla chasing you. That
Uh-huh.
actually
Uh-huh.
happened when you were asleep. So it's true if we grew up like the Native Americans did more
Mhm.
in nature,
Mhm.
that's why they're so spiritual
Uh-huh.
because they didn't have all those
They
distractions. They
they
lived
never
off the
lost
land.
it.
They never
They had it
lost it.
and then they never lost it. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
know. And if yeah, that's so
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Do you do your sessions only in person or are
Only in
you
person.
yeah, because
Only in
that's what I
person.
thought with this type
Yeah.
of
QHHT is only in I mean, so this is monumental. This is a profound experience for everyone. And we spend 5 to 7 hours,
yeah,
devoted
the
just to you.
whole day.
You spend 2 to 3 hours in trance, connected to higher self, receiving like ridiculous, miraculous healing. And so it's to honor the sacredness
Yeah.
of that moment. It's only done in purpose,
Yeah,
in person.
where are you located?
I'm in Durango, Colorado, which is the
Okay.
tippy tippy southwest corner of Colorado, nowhere close to Denver.
Yeah. Good to
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Do some of your client I'm sure some of your clients travel to see you. Is that correct?
Yeah, almost
Yeah,
all of them do. I'm booked usually 4 to 6 months in
that's great.
advance. Dolores had an 8-year waiting a list when she
Wow. Makes
passed, and so most of us have a pretty the level 3 practitioners, which is the highest level. Level 3 practitioners of QHHT are certified now by Julia Cannon, used to be Dolores,
mm,
to be practicing exactly as Dolores did. So
right.
if you see a level 3 practitioner, then you know that they're practicing, they've been certified, independently validated to be practicing exactly as Dolores did.
Right. And what more I'd love to talk more about when you said connecting with spirit is easy.
Hmm. Yeah,
Talk about that.
because it's just this altered state of consciousness. And I think one of the things that we forget about, one of the most beautiful things about it is um, that they want to be in our experience. I say they, meaning the
Mhm.
higher self. They refer to themselves as we, so that's why we say they in the plural. Um, but that they want to be as participative in your experience as most of us want to be connected and aware of them,
Yeah.
right? And so it's symbiotic. It goes both ways. And it's just this theta brainwave state. It's just this altered state of consciousness. Of course, hypnosis is a particularly deep state, a particularly solid theta brainwave state. And then of course with a facilitator in the room, we can have all of these conversations. And with this part of you that has been with you since the beginning, knows about every single life you've ever lived, every aspect of every one of those lives, and can also be connected to source and universal information, whatever we want to call it, the Akashic records or whatever, is easily accessible to that aspect of you. And so all it takes is just a little bit of relaxation and imagination. And yeah, like you mentioned, a lot of very practiced meditators also achieve the Theta brainwave state.
Hmm.
And I would say 90% of the days in my office, Shannon, somewhere in the session, the higher self recommends to the client to meditate. Like it is repeated. She needs to meditate. Well, how does she make sure that this disease stays away? She needs to meditate. How does she find, how does she stay on her path to purpose? She needs to meditate. And then I'll explore with the higher self, like, okay, fine. Does it matter how she meditates? She just needs to clear her mind. She needs to be not thinking. Okay. So you don't have to do a mudra or a chant or anything like that. You just have to be in a non-thinking state, an open and receptive state, a quieted mind state. And then I'll say, well, does she need to do this every day, once a week, multiple times a day? The answers are remarkably consistent across clients that don't know each other from Adam. The higher self will say every day. She needs to meditate every day without fail. Okay. But only once a day. Okay. Got it. And then I'll ask, well, how long? Are we talking minutes, hours, an hour, multiple hours? And they'll say 10 minutes. 10 minutes. They always say 10 minutes. Or 11 minutes, so somewhere around the 10-minute mark. So just a few minutes every day builds this connection to spirit, builds this pathway to spirit. And then not only do you receive from them, but they gain from you. Think about it. Your soul isn't incarnate, isn't ever going to incarnate. Your soul only knows what a rose smells like through you. Your soul only knows what the wind feels like on a cheek through you. And so you connecting with them not only gives you access to information from the other side of the veil and from on high, but it also gives them access to the human experience that you're experiencing. It's beautiful.
Right. And when you hypnotize somebody, I assume the higher self speaks through them
Correct.
as you ask the questions. That's
Correct.
so interesting.
Correct. And I've had people start speaking foreign languages they didn't know they could speak. I've
That's
had people
cool.
start speaking non-human languages, light languages. Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
you talk about I've light languages? That's something I know about, but I don't know a lot about, and I'd love to know what it's so weird. I mean, it's
It
I
is
say
weird.
that like what I do isn't weird. I say that with no judgment. I'm just like, what is that?
Yeah.
And is it I just with no experience of it, I'm always
It's,
so fascinated.
yeah.
Like, what
Yeah.
is that and is it real? And I do believe
Yeah.
it is. I just don't know a lot about it.
It happens, I would say, not frequently, but also not infrequently
Yeah.
in hypnosis. And what freaks me out is that client after client that have this access to the light language, the language is the same. They've never
That's
heard it
weird.
before. They don't understand. After they come out, if they were consciously aware, they'll be like, "What was that?" And I'll be like, "Well, it was light language." They will have never even heard of light language before, and yet their words sound exactly like the client from 6 months ago that was
Mhm.
speaking light language, right? In fact, I had one client who every single solitary question I asked the higher self answered in light language. And I just let it go, let the question be fully answered. And then when the higher self quit speaking, I just said, "Thank you very much. Now, would you please translate that into English?" And then they'd answer the same question all over again in English. Next question. Out comes the light language. "Thank you very much. Now, would you please translate that into English?" And I told that client, I'm like, "You have the Rosetta Stone of light language. Like you have every answer in light language and English. Go
Wow.
make a dictionary."
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
so
but
cool.
it's a language. I don't think it's necessarily associated with a particular planet. I think
Mhm.
it's very it seems to be a very rich language in that The sounds have a lot of meaning in comparison to English. I don't speak any other foreign languages, so I can't really connect it to any other human language. Um, but it seems to be like really compact.
Hmm.
Like if, like in that example where every question was answered in light language and in English, like maybe pretend numbers here, but a 15-second answer in light language would be like a 90-second answer in English.
Hmm.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
completely.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Um, other stories that you have about the way that this has healed people, or even funny stories, or anything that's sort of remarkable that you'd like to share?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think one of the ones that comes to my mind, I'm actually writing my second book right
Oh,
now. I was doing
fantastic.
that earlier today. And the title is going to be Finding Forgiveness, Surprising Healing from the Higher Self. So the current book is Finding Purpose, Surprising Wisdom from the Higher Self. And then the next book is Finding Forgiveness, Surprising Healing from the Higher Self. And so forgiveness becomes a very, very important emotional healing tool for the higher self. We get into that a lot in QHHT sessions and with the higher self coming through. And I had a client a few months ago. This was pretty recent. And I have clients down to the age of 16. 16 is the youngest that Dolores would recommend. And I had her this person's mother was a client of mine, and as soon as her son was old enough, hit 16, it was like literally a week after his birthday, she's like, okay, you're going to see Holly. Right?
Awesome.
And so he came in and he had his other life experience. So here's a 16-year-old
Yeah.
and a beautiful, beautiful young man, just absolutely adorable, just really great head on his shoulders, really, just a person in a wonderful place. And now he's going to be able to explore these amazing things. I'm like, oh my gosh, if I had had a session at 16,
Yeah.
how less
Seriously. Oh my
how less
God.
time I would have wasted. But anyway,
Right. God.
his past life, it was a past life, was one as a professional killer. He was a hitman.
Wow.
He was a hitman for like an Al Capone kind of situation. Like his job was to kill people
Whoa.
in this
That's
other life.
insane.
Yeah. And here he is, this beautiful,
Lovely
golden,
guy.
generous, wonderful, absolutely not a killer person. And of course, we unpack, why did the higher self show him that? Why did they want him to see that? Of course, there was some forgiveness to be processed in that moment, which was wonderful. And so I point to that as an example of I've never found any evidence of eternal damnation. There's
Yeah.
no such thing.
I
Absolutely
don't
no
believe in it
such thing.
either.
Yeah. And then number two, how 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 we can't judge other people's experience. We can't say, and it kind of gets into the subject of karma about
Mhm.
how there's this misunderstanding of what karma is, like it's some sort
Yes.
of punishment or
Hmm.
retribution or whatever. No, there is no punishment or retribution. Here was this killer, this person who killed people for a living, and turns around in this other incarnation is just an absolutely beautiful, wonderful person. There's our souls want to experience everything, and that means
Yes.
light and dark, and that means that we can't judge light from dark. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yes. Yes. And I think, I've often heard it said that sometimes you go through that you your soul chooses to be a killer, for example, to better understand compassion, which makes no
Exactly.
sense from our perspective,
Exactly.
but it's so the soul can learn from having had that experience when they go back to light that
Yeah.
that's not the way. And so in
Yeah.
this case, again, time is strange, but
Uh-huh.
he's reincarnated or whatever,
Yeah.
lives another life as
Yeah.
this beautiful person with a heart of gold
Yeah.
who's open to
Exactly.
love and has healed that part of himself.
And the brighter the light, the darker the shadow.
Oh, yes. Gosh, that's so
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
This is so
So
interesting.
so
Yeah.
if he is in this incarnation, I believe he is, and they told him, how impactful he's going to be to the world in a great way, in a
Mhm.
helping way. Well, if you're going to have that extreme light, you also have to have the extreme dark.
Absolutely. Have you yourself, I'm assuming, done this
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
as part of your training or
Yeah.
whatever? You've had the
Yeah.
experience yourself.
Yeah. Well, now we have to, as level threes, we are required to teach. And so then we have learners practicing on us, which
Oh, wow.
isn't always pleasant, but
I'm sure. Yeah. And what was your experience? Not you don't have to go into like your personal
yeah.
experience, but just what
No,
was it like as an experiencer of
mhm.
that?
One of my favorite experiences was one of my first past lives that I witnessed, and that was as an ant, like an insect.
Oh, I have questions about that. Tell me all about it. Yeah.
And so, I mean, we have clients that are, name an animal: trees, flowers, rocks, mountains, stars, planets. The craziest I think I've ever heard of was as a stereo speaker.
Mm,
Paint in a painting, not the painting, but the
but the
paint in a
paint.
painting. And so what we learn is that spirit can inhabit anything,
Hmm.
absolutely anything. We can have that incarnate experience in literally anything, animate or inanimate, because
Hmm.
inanimate isn't really inanimate.
Yes.
And so I had this experience as an ant, and I drop into the other life, and I'm like, wow, these trees are so weird. They look like blades of grass, but I'm thinking they're trees, right? And then I look into the distance, and there is a tree, but it's got like the colors are all wrong. It's like kind of like a photographic negative, but the sky's like this dark green, and everything's really like dark. And I was seeing, literally seeing, as I'm guessing, an ant sees. And then we had, I was in my little ant line going up the tree to get in the little particle of seed in my little ant mouth, my grasper things. Went through the entire ant's life. One of the most shocking things to me in that firsthand experience as an ant was, it was my turn to go out in the ant line to reach out and get a piece of the seed off of the tree limb. And I remember thinking, as an ant, because you're first person, I mean, you're experiencing everything: sights, smells, sounds, everything, as if you're in that situation. And I remember thinking, oh, if I fall, that's going to be really, really, really bad. That's dangerous. And then it dawned on me after I came to, I was like, insects have fear.
Feel it. Yeah.
Insects know danger. I never thought about that, but I knew that was dangerous. I knew that was risky. And then of course I ended up dying in that life. I was in my little ant line doing something, going somewhere, and the ant line was going across a piece of paper, and the piece of paper got lifted by the wind, and then I was taken away. And then the minute I was away from my colony, I knew, oh well, this is the end of me. And then I gradually, I guess, starved to death, or died of thirst or whatever in that life. But that was fascinating. And I've often thought to myself, I'm like, oh my gosh, this process could really inform biologists,
I
because
know.
if they have questions about something, well, how does an ant see? Oh, let me tell you, let me
Yeah.
put you into hypnosis, and you can be an ant, and you can see how an ant sees.
I always wonder about what the role of ants is from a spiritual, I mean, not just ants, bugs. I know that they're important for our ecology, but what is their inner, like, I'm like, I know they have souls. I know they have because they're
Mhm,
energy, but it's just hard to wrap my head around. Yeah. Like, why are they here? And
mhm.
since they don't have logical thought, like a plant doesn't either, but they can feel. So it's
Yeah,
just, I've always wondered about that. In fact, there was this
yeah.
gross spider scurrying across my floor today and I wanted it out, but I was like, I can't kill it. I just
Yeah,
can't do it.
yeah,
I don't, I feel, let my cat, I usually let the cats handle it. I'm like, if
yeah.
they want to kill it, that's fine, but I don't,
Yeah.
it just makes me feel bad.
Yeah. Well, the first time I had a client regress as a rock, I was like, oh no, now what? Like,
Yeah.
how does a rock
It doesn't
die?
die? So what happens?
Do I wait until it withers into a
I
grain of sand, or like what?
like what did you get any
And
insight
so
into that?
I asked the rock, how do you die? And
Yeah.
they said, I don't. I just decide that I'm finished with that experience, and
Ah,
spirit leaves. So, I mean, I don't think every rock has spirit, but I think rocks
yeah.
can have
Can
spirit, right?
inhabit spirit.
And so then I had to ask, well, why? Why would you be a rock? They said to rest.
Right.
I'm like, oh, well,
Makes
yeah.
sense.
What a restful life, just
Nothing can
laying
destroy you.
around at the rock.
Nothing can eat you. It's just pretty much hanging out. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm like, oh, okay. So
That's so
there's a
interesting.
purpose to every life. Our souls have chosen that life, be it an ant or honeybee or whatever, for that experience. Yeah.
Yeah, one of my best friends recently did a 5-MeO, which is a DMT, a form of DMT
Mm-hmm.
trip, which is from a frog toxin. And rather than a whole ayahuasca experience, it happens in like 10, 15 minutes. And
Okay.
so he's tried it, he's done it twice. And he said, what I learned was, and he suffers from severe depression. And so this is why he wanted to do it. And he said, I saw that, and he also identifies as an atheist, even now,
Uh-huh.
but he goes, I saw that every single thing down to every grain of sand has a purpose
Yes.
for being here.
Yes.
That's exactly what he told me. And he said, I realized I'm an important part of all of it. Every single piece of sand, every little tiny thing has an important role to play
Yes.
in
And
our
and
existence and reality.
and Shannon, even the depression has a purpose.
Yeah, I'm going to tell him that too. He's really struggling. And in fact, he said, after he had done that, for a week, he said, I just want to scream at everyone, do you know that you're a miracle? And he said, he goes, and I said, well, and I talked about atheism. He goes, no, I'm still an atheist. I think he just means he doesn't, I'll have to ask him to clarify. I don't want to speak for him, but since I'm not naming his name, who cares? But I took that to mean like, well, I don't believe in like the guy in the
Right.
cloud, and I
Right.
don't either.
Right.
But he understood it as, but you know what it is? He believes in it as part of science.
Uh-huh.
That there's nothing, I
Uh-huh.
think that's what
Uh-huh.
he means is
Uh-huh.
it's not anything outside of reality. It's real. Like it's as
Uh-huh.
real as we are, and it's not
Uh-huh.
anything magical. Just
Yeah.
depends on your
Yeah.
interpretation and your definition.
Yeah.
But
And I like, I think a lot of people are very open. A lot of sciencey people are
yeah,
very open to the thought process of super consciousness. It's just we are we we are sentient beings. Well, what does that mean? It means that we're conscious of ourselves,
yeah,
right? We can observe our own thoughts, so therefore we aren't our thoughts. And so therefore we have this consciousness beyond ourselves, and that consciousness is out there. It's not resident in our bodies, or else we wouldn't be able to observe our own thoughts. And so then everyone's consciousness can be connected to everyone else's consciousness, because it's just the super consciousness that we're tapping into. And so I think that can be a little more palatable for people that are really resisting the religious connotations of spirit.
I think so too. And knowing what you know, do you find yourself having, I don't know, a lot of spiritual experiences, communication with spirit? How
Yeah.
do you
Oh
kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
go
yeah.
through the world?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you can't not
Once
doing
you're
this
aware of
work.
it,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
realize
yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear
Absolutely.
about your
Absolutely.
experience of that, even if
Well,
it's,
yeah,
yeah.
I actually teach a course called Higher Self Integration. And
Ooh,
the point of the course is to a lot of us, we kind of boil the psyche down into ego self and higher self. And the higher self being the eternal part of you that isn't resident in your human body. And then the ego self, the purpose of the ego self is to keep your physical body safe, to keep it alive, right? Clothed, housed, fed. And for most of us, because of some of the early upbringing things that we've talked about, we get very aligned and identified with that ego self. But that's only a small part of us, right? And it's never about denigrating the ego or ego death or quashing the ego. I hate those terms. Your soul decided to incarnate as a human being. And that meant you would have an ego experience. You chose this kind of experience, which meant you would have the ego experience. And so we want to have gratitude for the gift of the human experience and the ego experience. So it's never about pushing the ego aside. But a lot of us are over identified with ego self
Mm-hmm.
at the expense of the awareness of the higher self. So we kind of go through, it's a 3-month process. It starts with just awareness of higher self, and then feeling higher self, and then knowing higher self, and then creating a life where you can shift from either ego self to higher self at any moment of any day. You can exercise those muscles to bring forward the aspect of you that's most appropriate to lead the dance in that moment. There are lots of moments when it is very appropriate for the ego self to be leading the dance. And then there are other moments where we can just allow the higher self to lead the dance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Oh, that's
yeah,
so
absolutely.
beautiful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
through your life, I mean, since you've been so aware of this, maybe it's nothing that stands out, but I do want to hear about your own experiences just going through the world knowing this and what
Mhm.
kinds of things you experience, even if it's general.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one of the biggest things is you just kind of get this sense of peace. I mean, you just don't get attached to things, you
Yeah.
know. Back in a few years ago, my husband would listen to, the news feeds and the news stations and get into all of the political rah, rah, rah. And it's like it just literally, I'm like, I'm the weird one, and I'm going, "What planet are you from? You do
Yes.
realize that this is none of this is real. It's just
Right.
TV shows, right? There's just people manipulating your fear, right? And you get to see when you allow higher self in and allow ego self to relax, because the language of the ego self is fear,
Mm-hmm.
then you just don't get hooked into that fear feed that you can see even loved ones around you get hooked into.
That actually, my ex of 8 years and I are very good friends. Like, just talked to him this week, love him. But part of our parting, without,
Mhm,
it's that was a big part of it, is he was kind of delving into all the
mhm,
watching the political stuff and getting
mhm,
really
mhm,
angry and getting really
mhm,
wrapped up in it. And I started to become more and more spiritual and
mhm.
meditating and yoga. And I was like, I don't identify as a political party. I
Exactly.
literally, I mean, not, I don't want to sound like I don't care about
Mhm,
people, what happens to people, but I literally, even the other day, I talked to him and he started to talk. I'm like, I literally don't even know about
right.
this law you're talking about because
Right,
just
exactly.
I had to remove myself because it was so exhausting and draining.
Yeah,
He's very smart and very educating
yeah.
and very educated and very passionate, but he was becoming more and more engrossed and angry with the 3D. And I was like, I don't even, this is like
Uh-huh.
not real. I don't, this is
Right,
the Matrix. And so
right,
we started to
right,
really just completely go
right.
off. We were like Dharma and
Yeah,
Greg, basically.
yeah,
But
yeah,
if you're old enough to know that show,
yeah.
but you
So
know,
there becomes this time you're
yeah,
describing, this moment in your life where reality is less real
yeah,
than reality, than
yes,
than spirit. Yeah, and
yes.
then and you break through the matrix and you're like, "Whoa, that's not real. This
This
is
is
real."
real. And
Yeah.
that's actually, I've talked on this show a lot about my own sex and love addiction recovery,
Mhm,
and I credit that with 12 step and working through my
mhm,
old triggers. But now I trigger I still have, like I still have some of that stuff, but it doesn't hurt like it
mhm.
did before because now I go, all right, this is just happening because I see what's happening here. Our souls were put together because we needed to learn this thing, and this is why it's happening this way. And I also know that this is not about me. This is my own projection. And it
Mhm,
just helps me
mhm.
see it from like whatever's happening in any kind of interpersonal relationship. I can see it as oh, it's a game and it's a
Yeah.
learning thing and this is what I'm meant to
Yeah.
learn and I don't crumble to the ground because I don't feel it's personal anymore. It's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I know it's not
Exactly.
about me, it's
Exactly.
about their
Y-
wounds versus
they
mine.
can't get their hook in you. They just can't.
They
Yeah.
can't. It,
Yeah.
it's, and obviously you still are a
Yeah.
human being and you're
Yeah.
still,
Yeah.
can have feelings, but you're like, I just, I trust now that it's all divine timing, it's all part of
Hmm.
the plan, and
Hmm.
that in dating, for example, I'm not really dating much because I don't want, I'm not actually dating, in a relationship, but it's because I don't, I'm not interested in just the doing it for the sake of doing it. I'm like, if
Uh-huh.
it's next level love and it's actually
Uh-huh.
helping my soul grow and
Mhm.
and that sort of thing, I can see it more now as the reason we come together has such a bigger purpose.
Yeah.
And even if it
Yeah.
isn't the person, there's still a lesson in there and
Yeah.
there's still a reason. So everything and everything, just even
Yeah.
life. I'm not
Yeah.
saying every day I nail it, but
Yeah.
money ebbs and flows and I'll be like,
Yeah.
panic, no, don't panic.
Right. Right. Right.
It's not
Yeah.
real. I get
Yeah.
a bill, I'm like, it's not real. Stop.
Exactly.
It's gonna work out. Don't worry about it. And it always does.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's such a different
Yeah.
way of
Yeah.
living.
And you know what's cool is in those moments, the Bill kind of moments, you can go, "Oh, thank you, ego. Thank you, little ego. You're trying to keep me
Yes.
safe. You're trying to keep me
Right.
that I'm so happy that I have you in this human experience to watch out for me."
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, where can I'm going to put all of your links below, but
Uh-huh.
I myself, once I'm back in the flow, I want to work with you. But I also uh want tell people where they can find you
Sure.
and
Yeah.
say the
So
name of your
my
book again. Just let's
yeah.
nail it
Yep.
in.
So it's finding purpose, surprising wisdom from the higher self. Yeah. So
Beautiful.
we've got this heart
Who did
chakra
the art?
on fire
Who did
there.
the artwork?
Yeah.
Did
So
you
she's an
person?
amazing professional artist. I commissioned the work
Hmm.
and she's on Instagram and she goes by Blue Star Seed.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, she's amazing. Yeah. So follow her for sure. Blue Star Seed. She's
Okay.
amazing. This is actually a self-portrait of her. All of
Oh,
her
wow.
figures are
Beautiful.
self-portraits of herself, or most of them. My website is awarecaredurango.com. 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 And if you go to kind of halfway down the homepage right now, there's a link to a free um, mini course of this higher self integration that I was just talking about.
So cool.
So, yeah, so awarecaredurango.com, you'll see about halfway down the homepage, there's a link to a whole bunch of ways to connect with me. And one of those is the higher self integration mini course. So, go do that. It's free.
Awesome.
It's a lot of fun.
For
We
sure.
actually practice hypnosis in the mini
Oh,
course
fun.
and meet higher self. So it's a lot of fun. And my YouTube channel is Holly Duckworth PhD. There's other Holly Duckworths out there, so make sure you do the Holly Duckworth PhD, and you'll see me there. And I share lots of session segments, like the actual recordings from the actual QHHT sessions, when it can be broadly shared, and of course with clients' permission. There's all kinds of videos on there about spiritual awakening, about QHHT itself, and about understanding the psyche. And so, kind of the psychological bent of things. I've got videos out there about that as well.
What a dream career you have. I thank you for coming on. I
Yeah.
love I'm obsessed with this stuff, but I've always been uh not a little bit intimidated by having guests on that know a lot about because I'm like I'm not like I said I'm not scientific and so I think what questions would I even ask? I'm going to sound like a I'm going to sound so stupid. But so it's wonderful to have someone be so eloquent and articulate and scientific
Yeah.
minded and be able
Yeah.
to explain it in layman's terms, but also, just be able to engage with someone who really can express what I understand but can't quite paraphrase or explain myself. So
Wow.
thank you for just introducing us to the kind of
Yeah.
therapy, to quantum hypnotherapy healing technique, whatever it whatever is that, what is it?
QHHT, Quantum
QHHT.
Healing Hypnosis Technique.
I'm
And if
so
you just Google search Dolores Cannon, you can't help but find it.
Yes. And now I'm going to go binge all of her books.
Yes.
So
Yes.
thank you so much. Holly Duckworth, PhD, thank you so much for being here. It has been such a fascinating conversation, and you are just an absolute delight as a human being.
Thank you, Shannon. It's been
My,
my pleasure. My
my
honor.
pleasure. Mine too. Thank you.